Fable is one of those beloved game franchises that people just love to rant about. The only Fable I've ever played was Fable 3, which I think I enjoyed and played through several times, although it's been so long since then that I can't really remember for sure. I had been wanting to play the original game for ages, but it was just one of those games that I hadn't gotten around to play. But now that I've finally done it, I wanted to share my thoughts on the game with you guys. So what follows is my review of the Fable Anniversary Edition. First up, the story. If you don't want to know anything about the initial story setup, just skip ahead, although I will only be talking about the intro of the game to give some degree of background and context. I know that some people, myself included sometimes, don't even want to know this, so if you haven't played the game yet and you want to know absolutely nothing about the story of the game whatsoever, just skip to the next part. There should be chapters to choose from in the description. In Fable, you started playing as a boy in a small village in the middle of nowhere in a sort of medieval European setting. That part at least is pretty classic for any fantasy action RPG. What is the most striking when starting up the game for the first time, however, is its unique art style that lends itself to the almost whimsical character of the game and the characters you encounter within it. What you will discover very early on is that Fable is a game that doesn't take itself too seriously, although the story rather quickly takes on some darker tones. The intro cutscene already alludes to one of the big strengths of the game, and in fact the franchise, at least judging by what I remember from the third game and what I've been told about the second one. And that is how your moral choices affect your character's development, the world around you, including how NPCs react to you, and in what way the story progresses. As I've only played through the original game once, I'm probably not qualified to talk about this part of the game too much, but even though I did do a good playthrough, I've actually done some evil quests as well, and we'll get back to that in a bit. Even those few evil quests that I did by accident did in fact change how people reacted to me in the game world. Furthermore, according to the Fable wiki, there are a total of 6 possible endings depending on how you choose to play the game, which, even by today's standards, is a lot. So it looks like the game does change depending on your choices and that there's definitely some replayability value here. But back to the initial story setup. After the intro cutscene, your father wakes you up from daydreaming about being a hero or a villain, hinting at the different choices you can make during your playthrough of the game, and asks you whether you've got a birthday present for your sister already. Being the terrible brother that you are, you obviously don't, and your father tells you that he'll give you 1 gold piece for every good deed that you do around the village to buy your sister a birthday present. This initial quest serves to introduce the player to Fable's morality system. You can do as your father told you and do good deeds around the village, but you can also decide to be an accomplice to bad deeds and get your money that way. The choice is yours, and the game makes this very clear from the outset. Although the choices clearly are good or bad, and there isn't really any grey zone in between those two, as we've seen in games like The Witcher 3 more recently. Although that one is more than 9 years old now, we're getting old guys. The game doesn't really strongly nudge you in either direction, so if you want to live out your villain fantasy, Fable might be one of the better games to do so. After you've got your money one way or another, you go and buy your sister's present and eventually find her on the fields just outside the village, and this is when tragedy strikes. Obviously something had to happen, otherwise this would have probably developed into some kind of farming sim where you occasionally beat up your neighbors for cash, which I would be all in for. Anyway, bandits attack the town and slaughter the villagers before your eyes. Another cutscene informs us that they were looking for you, the boy you play as, and his family. Arriving at their house, they kill the father and take the mother and sister away, whilst you were hiding in the fields where you found your sister, behind a fence. Which is probably the worst hiding spot I've seen in my life. I mean, there's holes in it, that's how fences work, it's not a wall, everyone can clearly see you. Anyway, eventually the player character comes out of hiding to look for his family, but he only finds his dead father. A mysterious figure capable of magic saves us from an attacking bandit and teleports us to the so-called Heroes Guild, where we will spend the rest of our childhood and youth to become a hero. This part serves as a second half to the tutorial, and it is here where we are made familiar with the basic mechanics of the game. After we finished our training, we're given our first few quests, which amount to little more than simple kill quests, but eventually the actual story starts to pick up again, and of course it's all about finding out why we were targeted by those bandits and why our mother and sister were taken away, but I'm not going to talk about these things in this review. Now that the initial story stuff is out of the way, let's take a look at the actual gameplay next. As previously mentioned in the second part of the tutorial, you get to learn how to be a hero at the Heroes Guild. Obviously, being a hero includes fighting heroically against enemy hordes, and thus fighting is one of the core gameplay mechanics of this action RPG. Who would have thought, hey? Anyway, at the Heroes Guild you learn the 3 basic modes of combat the game has to offer: melee, ranged, and magic. Because the original game was developed with the Xbox in mind, it is designed to be played with a controller. The game can be played with mouse and keyboard as well. I played it exclusively with a controller though. Considering the age of the game, it controls fairly well, although it is a bit clunky at times. The lock-on system in particular doesn't work all that well, especially compared to modern games. This isn't a huge issue, however, as on normal difficulty the game is ridiculously easy. In fact, I didn't die a single time in my entire playthrough, although some of the later bosses in the game actually got a bit challenging, but nothing too dramatic. The lack of challenge on the normal difficulty setting, combined with the dated controls, take away from the satisfaction that one would feel when playing some more polished modern action RPG, however. And because there's quite a lot of fighting in the game, I found it a bit annoying at times. Because of this, when after a certain point towards the end of the game my character's stats and equipment were maxed out, I just skipped all the non-mandatory fights and just ran towards my quest objectives. Which usually also included fighting, but often there was some kind of twist making the fights in the main quest more interesting than your standard fights. The fact that this game was developed with controller support in mind also means that you don't have to aim manually with your ranged weapons and magic, which makes both systems basically just a matter of pressing/holding down a button to shoot projectiles or cast spells. The melee system is a little more complex, with strong as well as light attacks, dodges and blocks. Nothing groundbreaking, but it certainly works well enough for what the game is trying to do, and again, considering its age, the game plays fairly well. I found myself using AoE magic quite a lot because it was great for handling large crowds of enemies, which the game throws at you quite frequently. What didn't work well, at least for me, was the quest system, as I've hinted at a few times already. But I admit that may have partly been due to my own stupidity. Usually in RPGs I try to do as many quests as possible, so whenever I get to a new town or a new location I explore everywhere and talk to everyone and take on every single quest. In Fable there is only really one place you can get quests from, and that's the Heroes Guild. There's a table inside the guild from which you can take so-called quest cards, which then give you actual quests to do around the game world. They mostly amount to go there and kill/protect these things/people, and are mostly there to make money, at least according to some of the people who watch my playthrough on Twitch. As I wasn't ever in need of money, I only did very few of these quests, as I found they quickly got fairly boring. Before I knew this, however, I just went to the guild and took all of the quests available, not knowing that some of them were considered evil, and once you've accepted a quest, there's apparently no way of abandoning it. At least not as far as I could work out, and if you happen to get to the specific area where the quest takes place, the quest automatically starts. I, as a new player, did not know this. The first time I then did one of these clearly evil quests, I was like, oh, I just murdered a bunch of civilians, oops. And I guess that was okay. I just thought, oh well, let's just avoid the other areas in which these evil quests are. But unfortunately, some of them were on the way to doing main quests, so I had to do them. This wasn't a huge deal, as I did so much good stuff that I didn't really change my character's inherent goodness and the outcome of my playthrough. But I thought I should mention it in case you haven't played the game before and you wanted to do a pure good or evil playthrough. Definitely something to keep in mind. Aside from this minor issue and the slightly repetitive combat, I overall had a good time with Fable. Particularly with the main story and some of the optional side content. My favourites among those were the brothel where you could sleep with a German dominatrix, something that as a German myself I obviously greatly appreciated, and the chicken kicking tournament at Oakvale. I spent way too much time kicking those chickens, but this is just an experience that you can't have in any other game. Or in real life, unless you're from Arkansas or something. I don't know, I'm just repeating stereotypes about American states that I read somewhere online. So yeah, if you haven't played Fable already and you've got some time to kill, there's definitely worse ways to spend it. If you like this review, consider liking and subscribing, and come say hello over on Twitch. And I'll see you in the next one. Until then, have a good one. Bye bye!